Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate in this afternoon, later today, working on a bill that would expand the Food and Drug Administration's oversight of so-called compounding pharmacies and establish a nationwide system of tracing drugs. Also possible today, the nomination, a procedural vote on the nomination of Cornelia T.L to be a judge for the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. The House will also be in session this afternoon, taking up 6 suspension bills. Actually, the votes on that later this afternoon as they come back for votes at 6:30. And hearings tomorrow on Capitol Hill. The Budget Conference Committee meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We'll have live coverage of that on C-SPAN 3. While this quorum call continues, we're going to take you to a discussion from this morning's Washington Journal on government contracting.
We're going to talk now about the size, scope, and cost of federal contractors in the workforce. I'm joined by New York University professor Paul Light. Thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely delighted.
Let's just start with a very basic question for the viewers. Explain to us what a federal contractor is and how they're different from full-time federal employees.
Well, sometimes they look awfully similar, but we purchase a lot of labor from contractors. We purchase a lot of material from contractors. They're one step removed from the federal government. They're private firms, some nonprofit, some who are working as, service contractors on Schedule C 1099 income. It's a very large number of people who work indirectly for the federal government, and there's a good debate about whether they are de facto federal employees. Some say yes, some say no, but it's a big, big workforce.
It is, and it's a big workforce with a big price tag. I'm looking at a chart from CNN that says that the United States government awarded more than $500 billion in outsourcing in the most recent fiscal year, paying for everything from submarines to janitorial contracts. Does that number ring right with you, Paul?
It's absolutely right. I looked at it yesterday, estimated this year maybe $550 billion, up substantially from 2003. When we were really throwing a lot of money at contractors for everything from tank treads to ammunition to concrete and food for the military in Iraq. So defense is a big player in this. Sucks up a lot of procurement money, maybe $150 billion of the total. As I looked at it yesterday, it's a very large amount of money. But, you know, we've got a huge budget, and we've got a huge mission, and we need those contractors to help deliver on the promises we make.
Particularly with so many contractors, especially as you noted, coming to the Defense Department, how does the government actually count these people? How do you get the best number?
You know, the federal government doesn't count these people, and contractors would argue that they shouldn't contract or shouldn't count the number of people who work for them. You know, they're in the business of delivering a good or service. Most of them are under performance contracts where they're basically promising a certain activity that produces a certain outcome. We're paying for results in theory, so they don't count the number of people who work for them, and they don't tell us much about the individual labor costs. They don't want to. They're not compelled to, and it's not exactly clear that it's a relevant number in the grand sense of things. We know that a lot of people work for contractors, but what difference does it make? The question is whether we're getting good value, whether we're getting the competition that we're promised, whether contractors are giving us the best price and are lean, efficient, and very effective at delivering on the goods and services on time, on contract.
We're talking to New York University's Paul Light. Want to make sure we get to your calls. For Democrats, your number is 202-585-3880. For Republicans, your number is 202-585-3881. And for Independents, your number is 202-585-3882. Paul, one of the big reasons contractors have been in the news recently is over background checks and security. Want to read now from a Washington Post article. The Obama administration on Wednesday accused the largest private firm that conducts security clearance background checks for the federal government in failing to perform quality control reviews in its investigations of potential government workers. The Justice Department has intervened in a civil lawsuit against Falls Church-based USIS, the company that conducted background checks of both former NSA contractor Edward Snowden and government contractor Aaron Alexis, who shot and killed 12 people at the Washington Navy Yard. Kind of walk us through that narrative and what it says about the contracting community and what's happening right now.
Well, let's rewind the clock on the security clearance contracting community. The largest contractor that does security clearances used to be part of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. It was a very large production facility, production being the granting of clearances, the investigation of individuals who sought clearances. You know, I don't know when it was, 20 years ago, maybe less, the Office of Personnel Management, the federal government decided, look, this shouldn't be in-house, let's push it out, let's cut it loose, and it became a private firm. So some of the things we look at in terms of things like security clearances were once in-house. The really good question here is, why did we push it out? Well, the answer is we wanted to reduce the total number of federal employees. We also wanted to get the benefits of an efficient, low-cost operation. And sometimes you get what you pay for. This operation was checking the boxes, checking the lists, making sure that they were getting the right people. But you know, the contract workforce is very, very large, and you do make mistakes along the way. Now, whether Snowden would have been hired if the service was being done inside government, it's a good question, because things that we do inside government sometimes fail. You know, we do use contractors for everything, really, from ladling soup in the Reagan building cafeteria, all the way up to management consulting, security clearances, very important activities. So in this particular case, you know, we don't really know how Snowden slipped through, but we know he did slip through. There wasn't full and complete review of his background. We know that people are slipping through all the time, but this contractor used to be in government, and we pushed it out. Question, you know, how capable is government? How capable are contractors at doing their jobs? And part of this is a lack of oversight. We don't have enough people to monitor the contracts once we let them.
All right, let's go to the phone, starting with Darlene in Sacramento, California, on our line for Democrats.
Good morning. My concern is that as you know, the Republicans were in office, they pushed a lot of federal dollars to contractors, and those contractors in turn don't have to hire, you know, everyone, but the federal government has the public trust, and you know, most people in America, most African Americans in America, got their jobs from the federal government or from state governments who had federal dollars. But as we moved under the Republican watch, all these monies went to contractors, and they hired their friends and their friends' friends, and more money went outside of the government. But we don't have the oversight, because Republicans constantly say that we don't need a large government. And in this capacity, the government has grown even more with no oversight. And it's just my fear that we need to pull things back so that we can have a country that has oversight. What do you think?
Well, look, we've been pushing out jobs for a long time. Democrats have done it. Republicans have done it. You know, part of the dynamic here, the politics of contracting, is that we don't want to increase the federal workforce much above 2 million people, full-time equivalent. That's sort of the de facto limit, and it's not entirely clear where that number came from. The Obama administration is a little bit above right now, but we're going to see that number going down below 2 million. Now, we've got a mission that's much larger than 2 million people. And if you say to the public, and Democrats and Republicans both say, look, the government's not getting bigger, you know, in terms of total personnel, it's at 2 million, maybe a little less. Bill Clinton, the Clinton administration reduced the number of federal employees down to about 17.5 million, and that's part of the reason President Clinton declared that the era of big government was over. Democrats weren't upset about it. They were pushing more jobs out as well. So look, you know, as long as presidents feel compelled to keep the federal government small, and taxpayers get real upset when they hear that number, you know, that the president has increased the workforce by 10%, and here we've got unemployment still relatively high, you know, how can we be adding more government workers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, Democrats and Republicans both favor more contracting. Republicans like it because if you got to have a job that's funded by the federal government, better that it be a private job. Democrats like it in part because it's a way to hide the true size of the federal mission. But, you know, from my perspective, we've got a big mission to deliver. We need the people to do it. And if you operate under this 2 million ceiling, you're going to need a lot of contractors. That's just the way it is. And contract hiring is not well inspected. They are not required, contractors are not required to tell you what the diversity is of their hiring pools, how they're making decisions, how they go about procuring labor for delivering on their contracts. They're not required to do that. And they would argue, and have argued to me, that look, they're in the business of providing a good or service. That's it. They're required to perform, deliver, stay on budget, stay on time, though they are sometimes quite late and sometimes over budget. but they're going to argue, hey, you can't look inside our organizations because of proprietary issues. We want to keep secrets on how we operate. That's just the way it is.
Let's take another call next from Bill in Clearwater Beach, Florida, on our line for Independence.
Well, thanks for C-SPAN, first of all, and thanks to Mr. Light for bringing us this information. My wife has a good friend who's contracted out to the Army individually as a computer IT specialist, and her contract is quite rewarding. She flies to and from her home every week. She doesn't live in D.C. area. She receives a rental car. She stays in a Marriott or a comparable hotel, and she receives $40 per diem per day. And I just wanted to mention that it seems quite a high price to pay for contract work. I had two questions as well, and wondered if you might answer those. The pay rate comparison between the benefits and the pay rates of a contract worker versus a full-time federal employee. And the other question I have is where do you apply for work as a contractor with the federal government? Thank you.
Stay with me for a second. Oops, we lost him. You know, his wife, am I right, is probably on a personal services contract, direct hire from the federal agency, but maybe not. There have been some limited studies, and the very best one is from the Project on Government Oversight. You can go to the website for this nonpartisan organization at pogo.org, and you can take a look at some comparisons of how much contractors pay versus how much the federal government pays for labor. The answer is that on an employee-by-employee level, just in terms of raw salary, just basic pay, feds, and I abbreviate it to that, and contractors are paid roughly the same, the employee. Now, the employee in the contract world gets better benefits to some extent, the travel and so forth, but they don't get better benefits in terms of pension, vacation time, and so on. This is like a one-to-one, apples-to-apples comparison, but when you load the contractor with all the other things associated with a contract, profit, executive pay to a certain extent, bonuses, so forth and so on, the contractor is almost always, except in the rarest of cases, the employee is almost always much more expensive, and I mean much more expensive, because you're not just hiring a single employee, you're hiring an employee of a large firm in most cases. So more than half of all federal contracts right now go to a relatively small number of very large corporations. Let me tell you, the top salary at Lockheed Martin or Boeing, that ain't $400,000. The top salary in the federal government is $400,000, and only one person gets that. That's the President of the United States. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts, makes $225,000 a year, which is below the current hiring rate of white shoe law firms for associates. So, you know, in terms of pay to pay, you know, once you load a contract with all of the profit, all of the operating costs, you're paying a lot more for it. And we've done some limited studies looking at that particular issue. Not enough, but some.
Talking with Paul Light at New York University. Next, let's chat with Ed in Sierra Vista, Arizona, on our line for Democrats.
Good morning, Mr. White. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning. I have a comment where you stated that these contractors, it's their business that they don't want to disclose their numbers, and information because they're private firms. And that made me stop and think that like some of the largest contractors, like you suggested, Boeing, United Technology is one that I'm very familiar with, and how the CEOs are paid extremely high. In the case of United Technology and Louis Chenevier making, say, over $20 million last year, which is really outrageous. And my concern is that they take some of these jobs and some of the parts, especially for, say, the Joint Strike Jet program, and they're sending these overseas, outsourcing, so that they can make more profits, and with national security and defense. And I'm really concerned that, you know, supposedly they're allies, but in the case of Snowden, where the United States government is accused of spying, say, on our allies, Germany and stuff, today...
All right, Ed, did you have a question about federal contractors today?
Yeah, the question is, shouldn't a lot of the information providing the number of jobs, where parts are made, that those specifics, the government should be well aware of that, and if they aren't, there's a big problem with that. Thank you.
Well, look, we've got a huge stack of books that define what contractors can and can't do. We do regulate contractors quite specifically. So the CEO of Boeing or United Technology, whatever, you know, they cannot bill the federal government for more than a relatively small percentage of the total salary. Now, on overhead, that's a different story. There are provisions that require a certain number of contracts to be set aside for small businesses and for minority-owned firms. And there are provisions that require purchasing of goods and services from U.S. firms. Now, where the U.S. firms might contract some of those sub-services through subcontracts and so forth is something that has to be inspected closely. But we don't have the personnel to inspect, to oversee many of these very, very large contracts. I mean, we've got $550 billion, let's say, give or take $10 billion, you know, which is considered a rounding error in the federal budget. Let's take that number. You know, the number of acquisition procurement specialists in the federal government hasn't gone up by much since 1990 when the Cold War ended. We don't have enough bodies inside government to oversee the contracts, and we certainly don't have enough people, specialists, to look at the interior of certain kinds of contracts. We now contract out for more than 80% of all our information technology because we can't compete with private firms for information technology expertise. So in terms of overseeing the contracts, that is very weak from my perspective. We can only sample on occasion. There's not much transparency. You have to have expertise inside government to look inside the organizations that are billing, and we just don't have a strong acquisitions core at this point, meaning enough people inside government. So we're back to that initial question from Sacramento where we're asked, you know, basically, well, you know, who's overseeing the contractors, how many are there, who's watching, so forth and so on, what's the diversity of the workforce, you know, what do we know? And the answer is that we don't have the workforce inside government under this 2 million full-time equivalent cap to really take a close look on an ongoing basis. It's up to the contractor in many cases to oversee itself. And, you know, that ain't good. That's the fox guarding the chicken house, if you get the overall metaphor.
Paul, let's talk healthcare very briefly. Over the last couple of weeks, contractors have been in the news over the healthcare.gov launch. Reading now from a Reuters report, At a U.S. House of Representatives Oversight Committee hearing, contractors blame the administration for a last-minute design change that has been identified as a flaw responsible for leading millions of visitors into system bottlenecks. Walk us through the role of contractors there, and do you agree with the assumption that there's a blame game going on between the administration and the contractors that worked on the site?
Yes, there's a blame game. I mean, look, you have ossification or arterial sclerosis inside the government. I cannot tell you who might have made any decisions inside government on this particular case. I just don't know. I look at the org charts. I try to find out who might have been the point of contact. I can't tell you. So inside government, we've got layer upon layer of leaders, more leaders per layer, and then we've got a nested contract outside with 55 subcontractors. We're trying to control the contract from inside government, telling the contractor, the lead contractor, what to do. That's a devil's dilemma because we don't have enough people inside government really to oversee, and then the contractor is passing this on to subcontractors who will have subcontractors, and those subcontractors to subcontractors will have subcontractors. I mean, who can tell? Yeah, it's a blame game. It's impossible to hold anyone accountable here. Now, I have a lot of confidence in Jeffrey Zients, the former Deputy Director of OMB, Acting Director of OMB. He's very, very good. He's running the operation to clean this up, and, you know, he's really working hard on it, and I have a lot of confidence in him. I expect that the website will be up and running. Whether he meets the November 30th deadline, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing to do. He's a miracle worker of a sort. He's done this in the private sector. Be that as it may, you know, what difference does it make? What difference does it make who made the decision? The answer is probably that a lot of people meddled in this, that no one person was at the helm, and that happens a lot in government, and that happens a lot in the contracting community. This is a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where the federal government in-house couldn't integrate this contract, as we call it. The contractor, the lead contractor, couldn't integrate the contract. We've had a lot of problems with contractors in charge of integrating these multi-tiered, multi-subcontractor vehicles, as we call them. So, look, you could have given it to the contractor. We've had problems over there. You keep it in-house. We've got problems over there. Look, what's the point? The website isn't working. So we got to fix it. Let's get it done, and then let's see whether Obamacare works. There's a good debate going on about whether this particular law is too complicated to implement. It may be a great law. It may be a great endeavor. It's certainly President Obama's signature achievement. But some would argue that now you're turning to the IRS for significant implementation responsibility. Think about it for a second. The IRS does not have enough people right now to enforce the penalty. Now, they're harvesting people from all over the place, and they're going to contract out. They've got to contract out because they don't have the bodies in-house. You're giving implementation of a major program to arguably one of America's most hated bureaucracies. Nobody likes the tax man, right? So we've got a lot going on in this very complicated program. I think they will straighten out the website. I have confidence in Jeff Zients, but we've got some distance to go before we see whether this program actually works, and there are a lot of bumps in the road.
Let's take another one of your calls. Next in Silver Spring, Maryland, Mark on our line for Republicans.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say I am a federal contractor, and a couple of different points related to the discussion. First of all, there are definitely some federal contractors who do, for all intents and purposes, function as federal workers. We go to work every day in a federal facility. We work as part of a division within an office, within a federal agency. I've spent my entire career in that kind of position. I can go months without setting foot in a company facility. I identify far more strongly with the agencies that I support than with the companies I work for. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't really know. But you can attend meetings sometimes in the federal government where half of the people present are actually contractors working in a government capacity.
Right.
And it's kind of fascinating.
Look,
I mean, and then a couple more points. I'll try to be somewhat brief. One, the entire idea of contracting out is predicated on the idea that government's not very efficient and that private industry is more efficient. But to get any savings from that, you have to assume that government is good at managing contracts, or efficient at managing contracts. And as you've mentioned, they really aren't necessarily.
Mark, thank you so much for your call. We're going to let Paul respond.
Look, Mark, you know, thanks for your comment. You know, many of the contractors who work for government are deeply dedicated public servants. Now, sometimes they don't like to be called public servants. They are de facto federal employees. And in your particular case, in Mark's particular case, I call what he was doing side-by-siding. Side-by-siding. Because he was going into the office and he was sitting at a desk next to possibly a full-time equivalent federal employee. His check was being cut by the contractor. The federal employee's check was being cut by the department and was being drawn directly from the Treasury. You know, and these side-by-siders, they work together, they report to the same boss. They are both in government. They are both in the public service. And you know, from my perspective, the vast majority of side-by-siders are just as committed to the federal government's mission as federal employees. And there are times when federal employees are less committed to the mission than the contractors. That's just the case. Now, when you go out from the side-by-sider who's sitting right there in the office, and you go out to the contractor, the benefit of having a contractor deliver services or using contractors is through the notion that there's competition, and that the competition is going to drive down cost, and if you're careful about the quality of the product you're buying, you're going to get a lower price, you get a leaner and meaner kind of organization. It's going to save money for you, it's going to deliver faster, it's going to be more effective. But many of the contracts that we create involve single bidders. We put out the request for proposal, which in some cases is partially written or fully written by a contractor because we don't have enough people in the procurement offices to write contracts, and some of them don't know how to write a contract for a particular good or services, so they hire a contractor to come in and help them write the request for proposal. Then we send it out and we get one bidder. Now, where's the competition there? And then the bidder hires a bunch of subcontractors. That almost always happens in what we call a bundled contract. So the current situation is that we have a lot of bundled contracts, that were sole sourced, and then we have the rise of these IDIQs. Now, that is not a well-known acronym in the world, but it's an indefinite quantity contract, where basically you're saying, look, we're going to give you a lot of money. We don't know exactly how much it's going to be, but we're going to assign tasks to you as we go along, and you're going to do them, and eventually we'll settle up. We'll know how much this thing costs. So the rise of the indefinite quantity contract is basically, look, we can't write all these little contracts. We've got to go big. So these big bundled IDIQs are out there. There's not a lot of competition. We don't know what they cost. Now, there are still a lot of contracts made to small businesses, minority-owned businesses. But 75% of all the money in the federal government now goes to 25% of the total number of contractors who are bidding at any given time. And you can do the math. We got a lot of sole sourcing out there. And if you believe that competition produces cost savings and efficiency, you got to say to yourself, well, how much competition actually exists, and how many people have the inside track on a contract because they've done it before. They've worked for the same agency before. We know them. So look, you know, there are contractors, and I'm not going to question the commitment of contractors to the government mission. Let's just assume that they all care deeply about delivering good service. There is not enough competitive pressure on them. There is not enough oversight on them. And we need a stronger in-house contract workforce. But I'll tell you something, there's a revolving door there as well. You got a really talented acquisition officer, procurement officer. They're really good at their jobs. They decide to retire. They're picked up by the contractor. They know how to get the work done. They know how to get through a really Byzantine federal contracting process. I want to make one other point. On information technology, where we are extremely dependent on contractors, the federal government sticks with contracts, bad contracts, longer than any private firm does. We'll stay with a bad contract 3 months, 1/3 longer than a private firm, because the contract is so hard to make in the first place. That's why we've had the rise of the indefinite quantity contract, because you let it, I mean, you create it, you sign it, and now you've got a contractor in place. You can call them up and say, we need this, we need that. You don't have to do a new contract. That's the reality today.
Paul, we got a lot of people waiting to talk with you. Let's go next to Gene, Nevada, with Drew on our line for Independence.
Yes, Mr. Light, I agree with so much of what you said and so much of what many of the callers have said. However, I come in from an era when apprentice programs, granted it's not a short-term fix, but a long-term fix, where there was apprentice programs and training programs to bring people up to speed to do things. And why can't the government do that for a lot of our people, whether they be 20 or 50, and train them in this oversight to look these people over? And also, what scares me, literally, is in 07, up till 07, I worked for a general contracting firm. Granted, they were not government affiliated in any way, but they did get like city, state, and local jobs that required them, supposedly, to use extremely talented help. And what they did, and I was witness to this literally, they put in much lower skilled, lower qualified help, and then actually falsified the reports to the city or state agency, and nobody ever checked it. And they just, example, say one job was supposed to pay $25 an hour on a prevailing wage situation. They would hire some guy who was only qualified to make $8 or $10 an hour, and then they would falsify the report.
Drew, let's give Paul a second to respond to some of what you've said now.
Look, I want to make really clear here that I think the vast majority of contractors are trying hard to honor their contracts. The basic problem here is that politicians, Democrats and Republicans alike, don't want to hire more people. They just don't. So you've got a president, you've had presidents, Democrat and Republican alike, who just don't want to hire more workers. They don't want to hire more IRS agents. The House of Representatives decided not to give the Internal Revenue Service more people, and you know, you're not a very popular politician if you're hiring more revenue agents, even though we need them. We have long inventories of bad information technology contracts, bad information technology systems. I mean, you know, you go through this and you say, well, government hasn't really shown its ability to do this kind of work, in part because the private sector creams the best workers. But as long as we basically say, and the public says, look, don't hire any more government employees, keep government small. But by the way, we want government to have a really big mission. We want government to do everything. Then you're going to get this disconnection where you've got to have contractors. You've just got to have them. And there are benefits of having contractors, including the competition benefit. But you've got to have strong oversight. You've got to deal with the lack of bidders and force more bidding so that you get that impact of competition. I mean, really, if I'm going to give the job to one contractor, there's only one contractor out there, for example, who can do a particular job, then there's no competition to force the contractor to behave differently in the bidding process. So, you know, we've got problems on both sides of this. And as long as the American public says, don't make government any bigger, and the American public defines government size by the number of people who work for government, which is a really easy measure, then we're going to depend on contractors. And we're not going to hire more workers to oversee the contracts. That's just the way it is. So Americans got to say, look, we want all these things the government does at the federal, state, and local level. Then you're going to have to accept contractors, and you're going to have to build an oversight process that's responsible and injects a very strong measure of accountability into the process. Back to Obamacare. I mean, who was overseeing the contractors? The federal government. Now, the federal government didn't have enough people to oversee the contractors to get this blame game going, and it's really irrelevant.
Next up, let's talk with Shirley in Tallahassee, Florida, on our line for Democrats.
Yes, good morning, America, and good morning to C-SPAN. Thank you so very much, Brian Lamb and Mr. Light. This is a wonderful topic this morning. I've been wanting us to have this discussion on contractors, as it is a very relevant issue, especially as it relates to this real web that Mr. Light just spoke about, this revolving web. We have a country that is saying that it wants optimal services and opportunity for its people, but yet there's an ideology that then is promoted that says that the government can't do that. And then we have people who are currently now without employment, without mobile opportunity and upward mobility, especially our young people. This notion that we cannot create opportunity for our oversight and for our procurement and acquisition review. We have many young people who are graduating from college. I'm an academician, and therefore we are understanding that we have many of our young people who are very capable of coming into these jobs. But yet we have a system that has created this web of convolution and this kind of pay and cronyism that comes with this contracting business. That's what this is really about. This is about a system that we have, the American people have accepted this system because we have this web of deceit that somehow if it's competition, and I really would like to have a colloquy with you, sir, so we can have an intellectual conversation, because unfortunately, just saying buzzwords that we need oversight and that we do not have the structural personnel in place, then why not? We have millions of our young people who are in college. You're a professor who are in college, who are needing to be given opportunity, and therefore we need to hire them. We need to go forward as a country and make a decision. We're at a crossroads in America. So my question would be, could you please tell me about this web of deceit that has been brought forward through ideology, through this cronyism, this pay-play methodology that has been, that the American people, as you said, have in fact bought into? How do we create opportunity, upward mobility, and future economic growth for a country where its people are about to perish? And you just stated 75%.
Shirley, thank you so much for your call. I want to make sure Paul gets some time to respond.
Look, I suggest that you go to usajobs.gov. That's usajobs.gov, and take a look at the jobs and take a look at how difficult it is to apply for a federal job right now. It's the same in many state and local governments. Our systems for hiring, for training, for retaining federal employees to do the kinds of jobs that we're talking about are fundamentally broken. The delays in hiring young people. Look, I work for the NYU Wagner School of Public Service. Our students are absolutely committed to working on issues that matter to the future of this country and the world, but they find that getting a federal job is extremely difficult. No feedback, it takes a long time, It's very difficult to find the jobs, even though we're supposed to have a single portal into the federal government. A lot of agencies don't post there or don't post their best jobs there. So look, I mean, if you look at the federal government, President Obama promised 2 years ago that, you know, he was going to do an overhaul. Now, my dad was an auto parts guy, and he did overhauls. He had a machine shop where he rebuilt engines. And when you want to do an overhaul, you don't just change the air filter. You don't just change the oil filter. What you got to do is pull that engine out and take it apart. And we have been 70 years since the last overhaul of government. So I talk about ossification. I talk about brittle bones. I talk about arterial sclerosis. I don't know how to talk about this to get attention from the policymakers who oversee this government and really don't seem to care about making it work better. So we end up in these situations where the hope is that a contractor is going to do a better job, and they're fast. I mean, they are fast. If you're sitting in a federal agency and you want somebody on board tomorrow, where are you going to go? You're not going to go to your human capital people and post a job and wait 120 days for it to be filled once it gets posted. You're going to go to a contractor, just like that. An IDIQ, the indefinite quantity contract, fast. And if you want to get rid of an employee, how can you get rid of one fast? You call the contractor, you get on the phone, you say, I don't want this person around anymore. And they're out by the end of the day. Look, contractors are not always the answer, but we got that big mission. How many contractors do we need to deliver that mission? Well, we've got 6 to 7.5 million, maybe more, maybe a few less. It's a very large workforce of contractors who help run the federal government, who deliver the services for the federal government, the goods and so forth. And, you know, we need them. We have to have them because nobody wants to change the mission. We don't want to give up anything. And we're satisfied with all the duplication and overlap in government. We're satisfied you know, with the difficulties in hiring and operating our agencies. We seem to take that for granted. We got to have these contractors, but you know, we have to oversee them. And I'd be glad to have a colloquy about this. I'm pretty frustrated about it. I don't know how we get Congress and the President to pay attention to this because, you know, despite President Obama's promise, he didn't do it. It's hard work to take the engine out of the car and grind it down and repair it. It's hard work. It's boring work. It's not the kind of thing that gets you elected. And President Obama's own campaign people argued a couple of weeks ago that this issue of improving government management didn't cost them a vote in 2012. And you know that's right. But the fact that Obama's people, President Obama's people, are saying that it doesn't really matter to the electorate does not justify the lack of attention to this. The President is responsible under the Constitution for executing every law faithfully. And that means building a government that works. And President Obama could have a wonderful achievement if he would just pay attention over the next 2 years to the reform of the federal bureaucratic system. Boring? Absolutely. Significantly important? Absolutely.
Right.
It would be a real legacy if he did so.
All right, Paul Light with New York University, always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Totally. Love it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Happy Tuesday. Hope you had an enjoyable Veterans Day. Which reminds me that, as you probably know by now, the President is enjoying lunch with service members at Molly Malone's, an establishment here in Washington, in advance of the annual dinner he'll be having with combatant commanders tonight. I have a couple of toppers to give to you. First, I wanted to note that the First Lady delivered remarks today at Bell Multicultural High School, a high school in the Washington, D.C. area. The First Lady's remarks continued to expand her focus on issues of youth empowerment and education, in particular working to achieve the President's North Star goal that by the year 2020, America will once again have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. In her remarks, the First Lady spoke directly to young people about committing to their education so that they can create a better future for themselves and their country. Following the First Lady's remarks, she was participating in a conversation with the 10th grade class at Bell about her own personal story of working hard toward her education. Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan also participated. Secondly, I wanted to note that at 5:30 p.m. today, the Senate will have a cloture vote on Nina Pillard, another of the President's 3 nominees to the D.C. Circuit Court. Pillard is an accomplished litigator and professor. Her career includes landmark accomplishments on behalf of women and families, such as helping defend the constitutionality of the Family and Medical Leave Act and helping open the doors of the Virginia Military Institute to female students. It is time for Senate Republicans to stop playing politics with our courts. 15 of the last 19 judges confirmed to this court were nominated by Republican presidents. 15 of the last 19. But now that a Democratic president is fulfilling his constitutional duty and nominating judges, Republicans make cynical arguments in an effort to maintain an ideological edge. More of President Obama's nominees to the D.C. Circuit have been successfully filibustered than those of any other president in history. We urge the Senate to consider all of these nominations on their merits, starting with tonight's cloture vote for Nina Pillard. Finally, I wanted to note a phone call the President had earlier. This morning, President Obama spoke with President Aquino of the Philippines to express our deep condolences for the lives lost and damage caused by Super Typhoon Haiyan Yolanda, one of the largest, strongest storms to ever hit land. Over the weekend, the President directed the administration to mount a swift and coordinated response to save lives and provide assistance to alleviate suffering. USAID and the Department of Defense are providing significant assistance to the people of the Philippines. Even before the storm reached land, USAID had deployed a disaster assistance response team to the area. After landfall, U.S. Marines were some of the first to help deliver supplies for the relief effort. American aircraft are delivering vital assistance and equipment. The United States is also providing food aid to feed tens of thousands of people in the coming days. Additionally, the aircraft carrier USS George Washington and several escort ships are on their way to the Philippines. On arrival, they will help expand search and rescue operations, provide medical care, and serve as platforms for a base of helicopters working to deliver supplies. Our State Department and USAID team on the ground is coordinating with local officials and other organizations, and in the days ahead, the United States will continue to work with the Philippines to deliver whatever help we can as quickly as possible. And with that, I take your questions. Julie, I just want to remind people, I think we have a preset for the President's announcement at 2 o'clock. Yes, Julie.
I wanted to get your reaction to a comment that President Clinton made in an interview that was posted today. He was talking about health care, and he said that President Obama should honor his commitment to people who have lost their health care or are losing their health care under the President's law, even if it means changing that law. Does the President agree with that comment?
Well, I think as you saw the President say in an interview with NBC last week, the answer is yes. The President has tasked his team with looking at a range of options, as he said, to make sure that nobody is put in a position where their plans have been canceled and they can't afford a better plan, even though they'd like to have a better plan. So you heard the President address this very issue in his interview last week, and I think it's important to note that President Clinton in that interview also said, and I quote, "The big lesson is that we are better off with this law than without it." And he said, quote, "The enrollment period did not come off well because the national website wasn't ready." But this happened once before. It happened when President Bush put in the Medicare drug program for seniors, which was not as complicated, but had exactly the same problem with the rollout. It was a disaster. There were people that lost their prescriptions for their existing medicine, and they fixed it. So the President, as you know, is pledged to task his team to look at potential actions that could be taken to address this problem, because his focus is on making sure that people get quality and affordable health insurance.
But what the President said appears to be slightly different from what President Clinton said. President Clinton seems to be talking about anybody who's losing their plan, and what the President said and officials afterwards said was that they were focused more on people who were getting cancellations and then maybe weren't getting subsidies to cover higher premiums. So is what President Obama is looking at more narrow than
well, certainly the point we've made is that for more than half of those on the individual market who, because their plans were not grandfathered in, they did not exist, or they were not participants in those plans prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, more than half of those individuals will have higher quality insurance with better basic protections at the same or lower cost. Roughly half, or maybe that is roughly half, more than half will qualify for subsidies. Some will qualify for Medicaid in those states where Medicaid has been expanded. For the universe of people, that smaller group of people within that 5% of the population for whom the fact that they've gotten a cancellation notice because they purchased plans perhaps in the last couple of years that do not meet the minimum standards, and they are facing challenges in terms of affordability, the President has asked his team to look at ways to address that problem. And that goes to the point he made about the vast majority of Americans here who, if they're an employer-provided insurance or Medicare or Medicaid or VA.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, back in 2005, before some of the current membership of the Senate was even here, we had a very important development when it came to judicial nominations and the advice and consent function of the United States Senate. Never before the presidency of George W. Bush had nominees to the federal court been filibustered. That is, a 60-vote threshold been imposed as opposed to a 51-vote threshold, which is, of course, what the Constitution says, requiring a majority of the Senate. But there was an impasse. A number of judges at the circuit court level and district court level were locked down in this impasse. But as so often happens around the Senate, a gang broke out. A gang was created. 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats got together and helped work us through this impasse. And they did so by adopting a new Senate precedent, which says, in essence, that there will be no filibusters of federal judges absent extraordinary circumstances. And yes, you may say that's a broad standard, and it's somewhat subjective, admittedly so, but the point was the default position would be that federal judges would get up or down votes, and there wouldn't be resort to the 60-vote threshold absent extraordinary circumstances. But the point is that's now become the precedent, basically the rule by which the Senate operates when it comes to federal judicial nominations. And it's a precedent that's been upheld and respected by both sides of the aisle ever since President Obama took office. Now, this afternoon, we will be voting on a second nominee to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, a court that some have called the second most important court in the nation because situated as it is in the District of Columbia here in Washington, most of the administrative reviews, the judicial review of administrative decisions, goes through this court at the appellate level, and because the Supreme Court only considers roughly 80 cases a year, for all practical purposes, the D.C. Circuit Court becomes the last word on judicial review on many important decisions, particularly those involving agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency or matters of national security or reviewing the regulations associated with the financial services industry like Dodd-Frank and the like. A pretty important court. Well, unfortunately, the majority leader and the president have determined that they're going to try to jam through 3 new judges on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, even though these judges are clearly not needed. And there is demand elsewhere around the country where the workload is far heavier, but because of the special significance of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, there's a conscious effort being made to pack that court with 3 additional judges that it doesn't need in order to change the current division 4-4 between in a court where Republican presidents appointed 4, Democratic presidents appointed 4, and so it is a evenly balanced court. As I said, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals doesn't need any more judges. So why in the world, in a time when we're looking to make sure that every penny goes as far as it can and we're not spending money we don't have, why would you want to appoint 3 new judges to a court that doesn't need any new judges? Well, here's the numbers. Since 2005, the total number of written decisions per active judge actually has gone down since 2005. As of September 2012, both the total number of appeals filed in the D.C. Circuit and the total number of appeals ended in the D.C. Circuit per active judge were 61% below the national average. So you might ask yourself, if it carries a 61% reduced caseload compared to the rest of the country, why don't we put the judges where President Obama can nominate them and the Senate could confirm them in places where they're actually needed rather than this court? Well, because of the reduced caseload and the lack of work for the judges to do on the D.C. Circuit, one D.C. Circuit judge recently told Senator Grassley, the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee, he said if any more judges were added now, there wouldn't be enough work to go around. Again, why in the world would President Obama insist and Majority Leader Reid insist on us confirming judges who aren't needed when there's not enough work to go around if they were? Well, my friends across the aisle continue to say that all they care about is filling judicial vacancies. But the Majority Leader has made it clear that his real objective is to switch the majority when the court sits in bank. For example, ordinarily, circuit courts sit in a 3-judge panel, but in important decisions, you may have the entire court sit in bank or all together, and the objective is clear, that the Majority Leader wants to stack it in favor of President Obama's nominees, to transform it into a rubber stamp for the President's big government over-regulatory agenda. Indeed, despite all the victories the administration has won before this court, it's apparently not good enough. This administration has won several high-profile victories in environmental cases, for example. But they're still upset with the court because it actually ruled against President Obama on cases related to corporate governance, emissions controls, recess appointments, and nuclear waste. So our colleagues are not content to have a court that's balanced and decides cases on a case-by-case basis. They want to stack the court in a way that is a rubber stamp for the President's agenda. But here's some examples of the cases the court has decided recently. In 2011, the D.C. Circuit told the Securities and Exchange Commission to follow the law, believe that or not, to follow the law and conduct a proper cost-benefit analysis before adopting its regulations. That's what the law required. The Securities and Exchange Commission ignored the law, and the D.C. Circuit said follow the law and reversed the Securities and Exchange Commission. In 2012, the court rejected an Environmental Protection Agency rule that went far beyond the limits of the Clean Air Act. Now, these regulatory agencies have a lot of power and a lot of authority, but it all springs from a legislative enactment by Congress. That's the source of their power and their authority, and in this case, it was the Clean Air Act. And the court said the Environmental Protection Agency exceeded the limits of its authority based on the law that Congress wrote and the President signed into law. And then in 2013, President Obama violated the Constitution, the court said, by making recess appointments when the Senate wasn't actually in recess. Now, this is a very important power that goes back to President Washington that makes sure that when Congress is in recess that there is still a way for the President to fill vacancies. But that was in the old days when Congress would basically leave town for months at a time. And in this case, President Obama essentially decided he didn't want to wait around for the advice and consent function or the confirmation function that's given in the Constitution to the Senate, and he jammed these nominees through using what he called his recess appointment power. Well, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said that's unconstitutional. Mr. President, you can't do that. The law does not allow it. But that is another reason why I suggest that the President is eager to stack this court with people he believes will be more ideologically aligned with his big government agenda. And then there was one more decision I'll mention. This past August, the court reminded the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of its legal requirement to make a final decision on whether to use Yucca Mountain as a nuclear waste repository. Now that sounds kind of arcane, but it is very important, certainly to the people of Nevada and to the United States national security interests when you talk about a safe and secure location to put nuclear waste. Mr. President, I would submit that each of these were common sense rulings for which there was a very sound and broad legal basis. And the court was doing what all courts are supposed to do, and that is to uphold the law. Apparently, the administration doesn't think this court should be in a position to do that, and they don't think they should have to be in a position to follow the law. They don't seem to care that the D.C. Circuit Court has ruled in favor of the administration on things like stem cell research, health care, greenhouse gas regulation, and other hot-button issues. They don't seem to care that the court's 8 active judges are evenly split between Republican and Democratic appointees. In their view, by upholding the law, the D.C. Circuit has been insufficiently supportive of the Obama agenda. So now they're attempting to pack the court with 3 unneeded judges in order to stack it in the administration's favor. Mr. President, I said last week my colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley's, offered a common-sense alternative, and it's a good compromise, and we've done it before. It would actually reallocate 2 of these seats on the D.C. Circuit that are unneeded to other courts in the country where they are needed. What makes more sense than that? We've done that once before. We took 1 of these positions from the D.C. Circuit and reallocated it to the 9th Circuit, where they needed judges before. So we ought to be putting the resources where they're actually needed, not stacking them in a court where the resources aren't needed in order to pursue an ideological end. Unfortunately, our friends across the aisle, the Majority Leader and others, have rejected the Grassley compromise and pushed ahead with their court-packing maneuver. Given their stated desire to make the D.C. Circuit a liberal rubber stamp, Democrats have created an extraordinary circumstance that justifies the filibuster under the 2005 precedent brought about by the Gang of 14 that I started off with. I wish we'd resolved this sooner. I wish my friends across the aisle would give serious consideration to the Grassley proposal. But for now, I'm afraid we've reached an impasse. And so we'll be voting on this nomination this afternoon. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I'd suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.